The office was dead quiet, the kind of quiet that makes your own breathing sound like a stranger's footsteps. It was pushing 9 p.m., and I was the last one left on the 14th floor, hunched over my desk, staring at spreadsheets that had started to blur into nonsense. My eyes stung from the screen's glare, and my coffee had gone cold hours ago. I was ready to call it quits when my phone buzzed, the vibration rattling against the wood like a warning. It was a text from William. "My boss, need you in my office. Now." My stomach did a weird flip. William wasn't the kind of guy who sent late-night texts. He was all business, sharp suits, sharper words, always in control. In the 2 years I'd worked under him at Carver & Sons, he'd never once asked me to stay past 7. Meetings with him were scheduled, precise, like clockwork. This felt off. Finally, I rubbed my eyes, trying to shake the fog from my brain. Maybe it was a mistake. Maybe he meant to text someone else. But no, there it was. My name clear as day. James, need you in my office. Now. No emojis, no pleasantries, just William being William. I stood up, my chair creaking in the silence, and grabbed my jacket off the backrest. The office felt bigger in the dark, the cubicles like shadows holding their breath. As I walked toward the corner office, my sneakers squeaked on the polished floor, and I couldn't help but wonder what the hell this was about. Was I in trouble? Had I screwed up some report? My mind raced through every email I'd sent that week, every deadline I'd hit or missed. Nothing stood out. William's door was half open, a sliver of warm light spilling into the hallway. I knocked lightly, my knuckles barely grazing the wood. "You wanted to see me?" "Come in, James." His voice was low, steady, but there was something else in it, something I couldn't place. Not anger, not urgency, but weight, like he was carrying something heavy. I pushed the door open and stepped inside. William was behind his desk, his tie loosened, the top button of his shirt undone. His dark hair, usually slicked back with precision, was slightly mussed, like he'd run his hands through it too many times. He looked up, his hazel eyes catching the light from the desk lamp, and for a second, I forgot how to breathe. William was 42, 12 years older than me, but he had
This way of looking at you that made time feel irrelevant, like he saw right through you, past the surface, into the messy parts you didn't even.
"Close the door," he said, leaning back in his chair. I did, the click of the latch sounding louder than it should have. "Sit." I sank into the chair across from him, my hands fidgeting in my lap. The office smelled faintly of his cologne, something woodsy, expensive, and the leather of the furniture. His desk was cluttered with papers, a half-empty coffee mug, and a framed photo. I'd never gotten close enough to see clearly. The blinds were drawn, shutting out the city lights, making the room feel like its own little world. So, I started trying to sound casual. "What's up? Kind of late for a meeting, isn't it?" He didn't answer right away. Instead, he picked up a pen, twirling it between his fingers, his eyes fixed on it like it held all the answers. The silence stretched, and my nerves started to fray. I shifted in my seat, the leather creaking under me. "James," he said finally, setting the pen down, "I need to talk to you about something. It's not work-related." That threw me. Not work-related? My mind blanked. William didn't do personal. In 2 years, I'd learned exactly 3 things about his life outside the office. He liked black coffee, he ran marathons, and he had a dog named Max. That was it. He didn't share, didn't ask. So what was this? "Okay," I said slowly, my mouth dry. "What's going on?" He leaned forward, resting his elbows on the desk, his hands clasped, his wedding ring glinted under the lamp, a quiet reminder of the life I knew nothing about. "This isn't easy for me to say," he started, his voice softer now, almost hesitant. "I've been thinking about this for a while, and I don't know how to approach it without complicating things." My heart started pounding, loud enough I was sure he could hear it. Complicating things? What did that even mean? I opened my mouth to say something, anything, but he held up a hand, stopping me. "Let me get this out," he said, his eyes meeting mine. "I've noticed you, James. Not just your work, though you're damn good at what you do, but you. The way you carry yourself, the way you think. You're different. And I don't mean that in a bad way. I mean it in a way that's kept me up at night, trying to figure out what to do about it." The air left the room. I stared at him, my brain scrambling to process what he was saying. Was he hitting on me? No, that couldn't be right. William was married. He was straight. He was my boss. But the way he was looking at me, the intensity in his eyes, said something else entirely. I don't understand. I managed, my voice barely above a whisper. What are you saying? He exhaled, a sharp, frustrated sound, and ran a hand through his hair again. I'm saying I feel something for you, something I shouldn't, something I've tried to ignore for months, but it's not going away, and I know this is wrong, God. I know it's wrong, but I can't keep pretending it's not there. My head spun. This wasn't happening. William, the man who'd intimidated me in every meeting, who'd built a reputation as the ice-cold head of the department, was sitting here, telling me he had feelings for me. It didn't compute. I'd spent so long trying not to notice him, not to let my own stupid crush on him get out of hand, that this felt like a cruel twist of fate. William, I said, my voice steadier than I felt, you're married, you have a wife, a kid, right? His jaw clenched, and for a moment, pain flashed across his face, raw and unguarded. I know, he said quietly, I know all of that, and I've spent years trying to be the man I'm supposed to be, the husband, the father, but it's a lie. James, it's been a lie for longer than I want to admit. The weight of his words settled over me, heavy and suffocating. I'd always assumed William's life was perfect. Perfect wife, perfect house, perfect everything. But now, looking at him, I saw something else. A man unraveling, fighting a battle I hadn't even known existed.
I don't know what to say,
I admitted, my hand shaking now. This is a lot. I mean, I've always looked up to you, respected you, but I never thought. I stopped, catching myself before I said too much. Before I admitted that I'd noticed him too, how I'd been in his eyes, how I'd caught myself wondering what it'd be like to know the real him. You don't have to say anything, he said, his voice gentle but firm. I didn't call you here to put you on the spot. I needed to be honest with you, with myself. I don't expect anything from this. James, I swear, I had to say it out loud. The room felt fragile, like one wrong move and everything would break. I wanted to say something to make it, to fill the silence, but my thoughts were a mess. Part of me wanted to get up and walk out, to pretend this never happened. Another part of me, the part I'd kept locked away for years, wanted to reach across the desk, to tell him I felt it too. But I didn't. I couldn't. I said instead, my voice cracking, I can't. We can. You're my boss, William, and you're married. I know, he said again, his eyes dropping to his hands. I know, married.
We sat there, the silence stretching between us like a tightrope. My chest felt tight, and I realized I was holding my breath. I exhaled slowly, trying to ground myself, but it didn't help much. The room was too warm, too small, too full of him.
I should go, I said finally, standing up. My legs felt like lead, and I needed to get out of there, to breathe fresh air, to think. James, he said, stopping me as I reached for the door. I turned, and he was standing now, too, his hands gripping the edge of his desk. I'm sorry for putting this on you for me. I didn't mean to make things harder for you. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. My hand was on the doorknob, and I wanted to say something, anything to ease the ache in his eyes, but I didn't have the words. I opened the door and stepped into the hallway, the cool air hitting me like a slap. The office was still dark, still quiet, but it felt different now, like I'd left a piece of myself behind in that room. As I grabbed my bag and headed for the elevator, my mind was a mess. William's voice echoed in my head. I've noticed you. You're different. I'd spent years keeping my own feelings buried, telling myself I'd never act like on them. I'd watched guys like William successful, confident, untouchable from a distance, knowing they'd never look at me the way I looked at them. Now, the one time I'd been wrong, it came with a wife, a kid, and a job I couldn't afford to lose. The elevator dinged, and I stepped inside, the door sliding shut behind me. As I leaned against the wall, I closed my eyes, trying to make sense of it all. William had feelings for me, feelings he couldn't act on. And I had feelings too, feelings I'd spent years pretending didn't exist. The doors opened to the lobby, and I stepped out into the cold night air. The city was alive around me, horns honking, lights flashing, but I barely noticed. All I could think about was William, sitting alone in his office, carrying a truth he'd spent years hiding, and me, walking away, wondering what the hell came next. The next morning, I woke up with a headache that felt like someone was drilling into my skull. My apartment was a mess, dishes piled in the sink, laundry spilling out of the hamper, but I barely noticed. All I could think about was William, his voice, low and raw, saying things I never thought I'd hear, his hazel eyes, heavy with something unspoken, that damn wedding ring glinting under the office light. I dragged myself out of bed, the clock glaring 6:45 a.m. I was due at work in an hour, and the thought of facing him made my stomach twist. What was I supposed to do? Walk into the office like nothing happened? Like my boss hadn't just turned my world upside down with a late-night confession? I splashed cold water on my face, staring at my reflection in the bathroom mirror. My brown eyes looked tired, my dark hair sticking up in all directions. I looked like I'd barely slept, which was true. The subway ride to work was a blur. I sat there, earbuds in but no music playing, replaying every word from last night. I feel something for you, something I shouldn't. It didn't feel real. Part of me wanted to believe I'd dreamed it, but the weight in my chest said otherwise. William wasn't the kind of guy to say things he didn't mean. He was careful, deliberate. If he said it, he meant it, and that scared the hell out of me. When I got to the office, the 14th floor was already buzzing, phones ringing, keyboards clacking, people chatting over their morning coffee. I slipped into my cubicle, hoping to blend into the chaos, but my eyes kept drifting toward William's office. The door was closed, the blinds drawn. Was he even here yet? Or was he avoiding me as much as I wanted to avoid him? "James, you look like crap," Sarah said, leaning over the partition between our cubicles. She was sipping her usual latte, her blonde ponytail bouncing as she tilted her head. "Late night?" "Something like that," I muttered, forcing a smile. Sarah was one of the few people I actually liked at Carver & Sons. She was blunt, funny, and didn't pry too much, but even she wouldn't get this story out of me. "Rough one." "Huh," she grinned, but her eyes softened. "You okay?" "Yeah, just didn't sleep well." I turned to my computer, hoping she'd drop it. She did, thankfully, wandering off to gossip with someone else. I opened my email, trying to focus, but my inbox was a blur. All I could think about was him. Was he sitting in that office right now, regretting everything, or was he thinking about me, too? Around 10 a.m., an email from William popped up. My heart stopped. The subject line was blank, and the body was short. "Meeting at 11. My office. Need to discuss the Q3 projections." No greeting, no sign-off, just business as usual. I stared at the screen, my pulse racing. Was this his way of pretending last night didn't happen? Or was he testing me, seeing if I could act normal? The next hour crawled by. I tried to prep for the meeting, pulling up the Q3 reports, but my hands were shaky, and my notes made no sense. By the time 11 rolled around, I felt like I was walking to my execution. I grabbed my laptop and headed to his office, my stomach in knots. I knocked, and his voice came through the door, calm and steady. "Come in." He was at his desk, looking every bit the polished boss I'd always known, tie knotted, hair neat, not a trace of last night's vulnerability. The room smelled the same, that mix of cologne and leather, and it hit me like a punch. I sat down, clutching my laptop like a shield. "Thanks for coming, James," he said, his tone professional but not cold. His eyes flicked to mine, and for a split second I saw something flicker. Guilt, maybe, or uncertainty. Then it was gone. "Let's go over the projections. I noticed some discrepancies in the sales figures." I nodded, my mouth dry, and opened my laptop. We went through the numbers, line by line, his voice steady as he pointed out errors, asked questions, made suggestions. It was so normal it felt surreal, like we hadn't sat in the same room last night, him spilling his heart, me struggling to breathe. I answered his questions, kept my voice even, but my mind was screaming, "How are you doing this? How are you acting like nothing happened?" The meeting lasted 45 minutes, and by the end, I was exhausted, not from the work, but from the effort of pretending. As I stood to leave, he said, "James, hold on a second." My heart sank. Here it was. I turned, bracing myself. He was leaning back in his chair, his hands folded, his expression unreadable. "About last night," he started, and my stomach dropped. "I owe you an apology. I shouldn't have put you in that position. It was unprofessional." Unprofessional. The word stung, like he was reducing it to a workplace mistake. I swallowed hard, trying to find my voice. "It's okay," I said. "Even though it wasn't. Let's just move on." He nodded, but his eyes didn't leave mine. I don't want this to change things. You're too good at your job, and I respect you too much to make this weird. I forced a smile, my chest tight. Yeah, no worries, we're good. But we weren't good. I walked out of his office feeling like I'd been hit by a truck. The rest of the day was a haze, meetings, emails, lunch. I barely touched. Every time I passed his office, I felt his presence like a weight on my shoulders. I kept replaying his words from last night, then his apology today. It was like he was trying to erase it, to shove it back into the shadows, and maybe that was for the best, but it hurt like hell. That night, I didn't go straight home. I ended up at a bar a few blocks from the office, a dive called Rusty's where the drinks were cheap and the music too loud. I sat at the counter, nursing a beer, trying to drown out the noise in my head. I'd always known I was gay, came out to my parents at 19, lost a few friends over it, but mostly found my way. Work, though? Work was my safe space. I kept my personal life out of it, kept my head down, until now. I was halfway through my second beer when I saw him. Not William, God. That would have been too much, but a guy I vaguely recognized from the marketing team. Tall, curly hair, maybe 35. He caught my eye and smiled, and before I knew it, he was sitting next to me, introducing himself as Nate. Long day? He asked, his voice warm. Easy.
Why, you could say that.
I said, managing a half smile. He was cute, in a laid-back way, and for a second I thought maybe this was what I needed. A distraction, someone to pull me out of the spiral William had thrown me into. We talked for a while about work, the city, nothing heavy. He was funny, charming even, and when he leaned a little closer, I didn't pull away, but when he asked if I wanted to grab dinner sometime, I froze. My mind went straight to William, his voice, his eyes, the way he'd looked at me last night. I mumbled something about being busy, paid my tab, and left. Back at my apartment, I couldn't sleep. I lay on my couch, staring at the ceiling, the city lights flickering through the blinds. I kept thinking about William's life, the wife, the kid, the house in the suburbs I'd never seen. He'd called it a lie, but what did that mean? Was he gay? Bi? Had he been hiding this forever? Or was I some fluke, some midlife crisis he'd regret in a week? And then there was me. I'd spent years keeping my feelings locked up, telling myself I'd never cross that line with someone like William. He was my boss, married, out of reach. But now that he'd said it, now that I knew he felt something too, it was like a dam had broken. I couldn't unknow it. I couldn't unfeel the way my heart raced when he looked at me. The next few weeks were torture. Work became a tightrope walk. Every meeting, every email, every glance from William felt loaded. He kept things professional, but there were moments, a lingering look, a pause before he spoke that made me think he wasn't as over it as he claimed. I tried to focus on my job, but my head was a mess. I started staying late again, not because I had to, but because I wanted to be near him, even if it was just passing his office on my way out. But my head was a mess. I started staying late again, not because I had to, but because I wanted to be near him. One night, about a month after the late-night call, I was packing up when I saw his office light still on. The rest of the floor was dark, just like that night. My heart thudded, but I couldn't stop myself. I walked over, knocked lightly, and pushed the door open. He was at his desk, tie-off sleeves rolled up, looking as tired as I felt. "James," he said, surprised, sitting up straighter. "What are you still doing here?" "Could ask you the same thing," I said, leaning against the doorframe, trying to sound casual. My hands were shaking, but I shoved them in my pockets. He smiled, just a little, and it was like a crack in his armor. Couldn't sleep. Figured I'd get some work done. "Yeah, same. A lie, but it sounded better than I. Can't stop thinking about you." We stood there, the silence heavy but not uncomfortable. It felt like we were on the edge of something, teetering. "James," he said, his voice softer now, "I meant what I said about keeping things professional, but it's harder than I thought." My breath caught. "Yeah," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "It's hard for me too." He looked at me then, really looked at me, and I saw it again, that raw, unguarded thing in his eyes. Not just guilt or regret, but longing, the same longing I'd been carrying since that night. I wanted to say something, to close the distance between us, but I didn't. Instead, I nodded, turned, and walked out, my heart pounding so loud I was sure he heard it. As I rode the subway home, the city blurring past the windows, I realized something. This wasn't just about William anymore. It was about me, too, about the parts of myself I'd kept hidden, the risks I'd never taken. I didn't know what came next, but I knew I couldn't keep running from it. Not anymore. Couldn't keep running from it. Not anymore. The air in the office felt different now, like it was charged with something I couldn't name. Every day, I walked into Carver & Sons, knowing I'd see William, and that knowledge was both a lifeline and a weight. It had been 6 weeks since his late-night confession, a month since I'd stood in his office doorway, admitting it was hard for me too. We hadn't talked about it since, but the silence between us wasn't empty. It was full of glances, pauses, moments where our hands brushed passing a report, and my heart would stutter. I tried to keep my head down, focus on work, but it was like trying to ignore a storm brewing outside your window. William was everywhere, leading meetings, signing off on my reports, standing too close in the break room while we waited for the coffee machine. He was professional, always, but there were cracks in his armor, a smile that lingered too long, a question about my weekend that felt too personal. Every time, I'd catch myself wanting to lean into it, to cross the line we'd both drawn, but I didn't. I couldn't. Life outside the office wasn't much better. I'd stopped going to Rusty's after that night with Nate. Bars felt too loud, too full of people who weren't him. My friends noticed I was off. Sarah kept asking if I was stressed. My buddy Mike texted about grabbing beers, but I brushed them off. I didn't know how to explain it. How do you tell someone you're falling for your married boss, who might be falling for you too? But it's all a mess you can't touch. One Friday, everything shifted. It was late October. The city turning crisp, leaves crunching underfoot on my walk to the subway. We'd just wrapped a big project, and the team was in high spirits, planning drinks to celebrate. Sarah cornered me at my cubicle, her eyes bright. "You're coming, right? No excuses. James, you've been a ghost lately. Hauer spal nikifu, enemy deshen." I hesitated, my eyes drifting to William's office. He was on a call, pacing, one hand in his pocket, the other gesturing. Even from here, he looked tired, the lines around his eyes deeper than usual. "Maybe," I said, tearing my gaze away. "Got some stuff to finish up." She rolled her eyes. "Lame. You're coming. I'll drag you if I have to." She flounced off, and I couldn't help but smile. Sarah had a way of making things feel lighter, even when they weren't. By 6 p.m., the office was half empty, most people already at the bar. I was packing up, debating whether to bail, when William's door opened. "James," he called, his voice carrying across the quiet floor. "Got a minute?" My stomach flipped. I nodded, grabbing my bag, and headed to his office. The door was open, but I still knocked, a habit I couldn't shake. "What's up?" He was leaning against his desk, arms crossed, tie loosened. The room felt warmer than it should have, the familiar scent of his cologne hitting me like a memory. "Close the door," he said, his voice low. I did, my heart thudding. This was too much like that first night, and I wasn't sure I could handle it again. I stayed by the door, keeping distance between us, my bag slung over my shoulder like a shield. "Everything okay?" He didn't answer right away. Instead, he looked at me, really looked like he was trying to see inside my head. "I heard the team's going out tonight," he said finally. "You joining them?" I shrugged, caught off guard. "Maybe Sarah's on my case about it." He nodded, a small smile tugging at his lips. "Good. You should go. You've been quiet lately." Quiet. That was one way to put it. I shifted my weight, unsure what to say. "Just been busy, I guess." His smile faded, and he pushed off the desk, taking a step toward me. My breath caught, but I didn't move. "James," he said, his voice softer now. "I know things have been strange. I know I made them strange, and I'm trying to keep my promise, keep this professional, but it's not easy." I swallowed hard, my mouth dry. "Yeah," I said, echoing that night a month ago. "It's not easy for me either." He exhaled, a sharp sound, and ran a hand through his hair. It was mussed now, dark strands falling over his forehead, and he looked younger, less like the untouchable boss I'd always known. "I don't know what I'm doing," he admitted, his voice raw. "I've spent my whole life knowing exactly what I'm supposed to do. Work, family, all of it. But with you, I don't know the rules anymore." My chest tightened. I wanted to say something, to tell him I didn't know the rules either, but the words stuck. Instead, I said, "You've got a lot to lose, William. More than me. His eyes darkened, and for a moment he looked like he was carrying the weight of the world. You think I don't know that? He said quietly. My wife, my daughter, they're my life. But this, whatever this is, it's real too, and I can't keep pretending it's not. I stared at him, my heart pounding so loud I was sure he could hear it. This was it, the moment where we could cross that line or walk away. I thought about his wife, the kid I'd never met, the life he'd built. I thought about my own life, the years I'd spent keeping my heart locked up, scared to let anyone in. And I thought about him, William, standing here, risking everything just to say this out loud. I don't know what to do, I said, my voice breaking. I feel it too, okay? I've felt it for months, but we can't, we can't. He nodded, but he didn't look away. I know, he said, his voice barely above a whisper, but I needed you to know I'm not just playing with this. It's not a game to me. The room felt too small, too full of us. I wanted to reach out, to touch him, to make this moment mean something more than words, but I didn't. Instead, I said, I should go. The team's waiting. He nodded again, stepping back, putting distance between us. Yeah, have fun. James. I turned and walked out, my legs shaky, my heart a mess. The elevator ride down was a blur, and when I stepped outside, the cold air hit me like a slap. I headed to the bar, not because I wanted to, but because I needed noise, people, something to drown out the echo of his voice. And the bar was packed. The team sprawled across a corner booth, laughing and clinking glasses. Sarah spotted me and waved me over, shoving a beer into my hand. About time, she said, grinning. Thought you'd ditch us. I forced a smile, sliding into the booth, but my mind was still in that office. The night blurred, drinks, stories, Sarah's bad karaoke, but I was only half there. Around midnight, I slipped out, needing air, needing to think. I ended up walking, no destination, just moving. The city was alive, lights buzzing, people spilling out of bars, but I felt alone. My phone buzzed in my pocket, and I pulled it out, half hoping, half dreading it. Was him. It wasn't. Just a text from Sarah. You okay? You bailed quick. Quick. Bail. I didn't reply. Instead, I kept walking, ending up at a park bench near the river. The water was dark, reflecting the city lights, and I sat there, staring at it, trying to make sense of my life. I'd spent years building walls, keeping my heart safe. Work was my escape, the place where I could be good at something without risking anything. But William had changed that. He'd cracked those walls, and now I didn't know how to put them back up. The next week was quiet. William was out of the office for a conference, and I threw myself into work, grateful for the break. But when he came back, it was like nothing had changed and everything had. We fell into a rhythm, professional but fragile, like we were both holding our breath. He'd ask me to stay late sometimes, just to go over reports, and I'd say yes, even though I knew it was dangerous, not because anything happened, it never did, but because those moments, alone in his office, felt like the closest we'd ever get to the truth. One night, about 2 weeks after the bar, I was leaving when I saw him in the parking garage. He was leaning against his car, keys in hand, staring at the ground. I hesitated, then walked over. Hey, I said, my voice echoing in the empty space. He looked up, startled, then smiled. Hey, late night? Yeah, you know me. I stopped a few feet away, my hands in my pockets. You okay? He shrugged, his smile fading. Been better, rough week. I nodded, not pushing. We stood there, the silence heavy but not awkward. Finally, he said, You ever feel like you're living someone else's life? Like you're playing a part, but it's not you? My throat tightened. Sometimes, I said. Not lately, though. He looked at me, his eyes searching mine. You're lucky, then. I wanted to tell him he didn't have to keep playing the part, that he could be himself, but I didn't. Instead, I said, You'll figure it out, William, you always do. He laughed, a soft, bitter sound. Not this time. I don't think. We stood there a moment longer. Then he pushed off the car. Get home safe, James. You too, I said, watching as he got in and drove off. I walked to the subway, the cold biting at my hands, and realized I was shaking, not from the cold, but from him. The next day, Sarah caught me in the break room. You and William, she said, her voice low, teasing. What's the deal? You guys are, like, glued at the hip lately. I froze, my coffee halfway to my mouth. What? No, it's just work. He's my boss. She raised an eyebrow, smirking. Sure, okay, just saying. You two have this vibe. I laughed it off, but my heart was racing. Was it that obvious, or was Sarah just fishing? Either way, it scared me. If she noticed, others might too, and that was a risk neither of us could afford. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about William, his laugh in the garage, the way he'd looked at me, like I was the only thing keeping him grounded. I thought about my own life, the years I'd spent hiding, scared to let anyone too close, and I realized something. I didn't want to hide anymore. Not from him, not from myself. The next morning, I walked into his office unannounced, my heart in my throat. He was at his desk, papers spread out, looking as tired as ever. "James," he said, surprised. "Everything okay?" "No," I said, closing the door behind me. "It's not okay. I can't keep doing this, pretending nothing's there, acting like we're just boss and employee. I know it's messy. I know you've got a life. But I need to say this. I care about you. William, more than I should, and I don't know what to do with that. I care about you." He stared at me, his eyes wide, and for a moment I thought I'd ruined everything. Then he stood, walked around the desk, and stopped a foot away. "James," he said, his voice shaking, "you don't know how much I've wanted to hear that, but we can't. I can't. I can't. I can't." "I know," I said, my voice breaking, but I had to say it. "I'm done hiding." He nodded, his eyes bright, and for a moment I thought he might reach for me. But he didn't. Instead, he said, "Thank you for being honest. For being you." I left his office, my heart a mess but lighter somehow. I didn't know what came next, but for the first time in years, I felt like I was living my own life, not someone else's. The weeks after I told William how I felt were like walking through fog. Everything looked the same cubicle, same coffee machine, same city skyline, but nothing felt right. I'd laid my cards on the table, said the thing I'd been scared to say, and now I was stuck waiting for the fallout. William didn't avoid me, but he didn't push either. Our interactions were careful, like we were both tiptoeing around broken glass. A nod in the hallway, a quick email about a deadline, a glance that lingered too long. It was enough to keep me up at night, wondering if I'd made a mistake. It was mid-November now, the city wrapped in a cold that seeped into your bones. Thanksgiving was around the corner, and the office was buzzing with holiday plans. Sarah talking about her mom's famous pie. The interns planning a potluck. I didn't have much to say about it. My family was back in Ohio, and we hadn't been close since I came out. I'd usually spend the holidays with friends, but this year I wasn't in the mood. My head was too full of William. One Tuesday, I was working late. The office quiet except for the hum of the heater. I'd gotten into the habit of staying past 7, not because I had to, but because it felt like the only place I could think straight. Or maybe it was because I knew William stayed late too, and some part of me hoped we'd run into each other. Pathetic, maybe, but I couldn't help it. Around 8:30, I heard footsteps and looked up to see him standing by my cubicle, his coat slung over his arm. He looked tired, his hazel eyes shadowed, but there was a softness there I hadn't seen in a while. "You're still here," he said, his voice low, almost surprised. "Yeah," I said, leaning back in my chair, "just finishing up some reports." He nodded, but he didn't move, just stood there, watching me. The silence stretched, heavy but not uncomfortable, like we were both waiting for the other to make a move. Finally, he said, "You want to grab a coffee? There's a place down the street that's still open." My heart skipped. This wasn't a work meeting, and we both knew it. I hesitated, then nodded. "Sure, let me grab my stuff." The coffee shop was small, tucked between a deli and a dry cleaner, with mismatched chairs and a chalkboard menu. We ordered black coffee for him, latte for me, and sat by the window, the city lights blurring through the fogged-up glass. It felt strange, being here with him, away from the office, like we were stepping into a different world, one where we weren't boss and employee, just two guys trying to figure things out. "So," I said, wrapping my hands around my mug, "how's your week been?" He shrugged, stirring his coffee absently. "Busy, family stuff, work stuff. You know how it goes." Not really. I knew nothing about his family beyond the basics. A wife named Laura, a daughter named Sophie, maybe 10 years old. I'd seen a photo on his desk once, but I'd never asked about them. It felt like crossing a line. Now, though, sitting across from him, I wanted to know not just about them, but about him, the real him, not the polished boss I saw every day. "How's Sophie?" I asked, testing the waters. His face softened, a small smile tugging at his lips. "She's good, smart as hell, always asking questions. I don't know how to answer. She wants to be an astronaut this week. Last month, it was a chef, always asking questions." I smiled, picturing a kid with his eyes, curious and stubborn. "Sounds like she keeps you on your toes." "She does." He paused, his smile fading. "It's complicated, though. At home. I nodded, not pushing. I could feel the weight of what he wasn't saying, the life he was carrying. "Instead," I said, "my family's complicated too. Haven't talked to my parents in years. Holidays are always weird." He looked at me, his eyes searching. "That's rough. You got friends you spend it with?" "Yeah, usually. This year, though," I trailed off, not sure how to explain the ache in my chest. "I don't know. Feels different." He nodded, like he understood. Maybe he did. We sipped our coffee, the silence settling between us, warm and quiet. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I could breathe. "James," he said after a while, his voice low, "I've been thinking about what you said in my office that morning, about not hiding anymore." My stomach tightened, but I kept my eyes on him. "Yeah? I've spent my whole life hiding," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Not just this, how I feel about you, but everything, who I am, what I want. I married Laura because it was what I was supposed to do. Good job, good wife, good life, but it's not me. My heart was pounding now, but I didn't say anything. I just listened, letting him get it out. "I'm not saying I have it all figured out," he went on, his eyes fixed on his coffee. I've got a kid, a home, responsibilities. But sitting here, with you, it's the first time in years I've felt like myself, like I'm not pretending." I swallowed hard, my throat tight. "William, I don't want to mess up your life. I know what's at stake, but I meant what I said. I care about you, and it's killing me to keep acting like I don't." He looked up, his eyes meeting mine, and for a moment, the world stopped. It was just us, two people caught in something bigger than we knew how to handle. "I care about you too," he said, his voice steady but raw, "more than I should, more than I know what to do with." We sat there, the words hanging between us, heavy and real. I wanted to reach across the table, to touch his hand, to make this moment mean something more. But I didn't. Not here. Not now. Instead, I said, "What do we do about it?" He exhaled a shaky sound and leaned back in his chair. "I don't know, but I want to find out. Not tonight, not tomorrow, but I want to try. I want to try." But it wasn't a promise, not exactly, but it was enough, for now. It was enough. For now. The next few weeks were different. Not easier, but clearer. William and I didn't talk about that night again, but something had shifted. We'd crossed a line, not physically, but emotionally. We started meeting for coffee, sometimes lunch. Always outside the office. Never anything more than talking. But those talks were everything. He told me about growing up in a small town, about the pressure to be the perfect son, the perfect man. I told him about coming out, about losing friends, about the years I'd spent trying to prove I was enough. Christmas came, and with it, a week off work. I went to Mike's place for a low-key holiday, but my mind was on William. He'd told me he was spending it with his family, and I tried not to think about what that meant. Was he sitting at a dinner table, pretending everything was fine? Was he thinking about me, too? When we got back to work in January, he seemed quieter, more guarded. I didn't push, but I noticed the way his shoulders tensed in meetings, the way his smile didn't reach his eyes. One night, after everyone else had left, I found him in his office, staring out the window at the city lights. "Hey," I said, leaning against the doorframe. "You okay?" He turned, his face softening when he saw me. "Yeah, just thinking." "About what?" I stepped inside, closing the door behind me. It was a risk, being here alone with him, but I didn't care anymore. He hesitated, then said, "I told Laura, I want a divorce." The words hit me like a punch. I stared at him, my mind racing. What? When? Over the holidays, he said, his voice steady but tired. It's been a long time coming, not just because of this, us, but because I can't keep living a lie. She deserves better. Sophie deserves better. I nodded, my heart pounding. How'd she take it? Not great, he admitted, running a hand through his hair, but she wasn't surprised. I think she's known for a while that something wasn't right. We're trying to keep it civil, for Sophie's sake. I didn't know what to say. Part of me was relieved he was choosing himself, finally, but part of me felt guilty, like I'd set this in motion. I'm sorry, I said, my voice thick. I didn't want to. Don't, he cut me off, his eyes fierce. This isn't your fault, James. This is me, figuring out who I am. You made me see. I couldn't keep running from it. We stood there, the distance between us feeling smaller than ever. I wanted to ask what this meant for us, but it felt too soon, too selfish. Instead, I said, "What now?" He smiled, a real smile this time, small but genuine. Now I figure out how to be honest with Laura, with Sophie, with myself, and maybe with you. My chest ached, but in a good way, like something was finally breaking free. I'd like that, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Spring came, and with it, a new rhythm. William moved out, got an apartment a few blocks from the office. He told me about it over coffee one morning, his voice lighter than I'd ever heard it. He was still navigating the divorce, still figuring out how to co-parent Sophie, but he seemed freer, like he was shedding a skin he'd outgrown. We kept things slow, careful, no grand gestures, no rushed decisions, just coffee, walks, late-night talks about everything and nothing. I told him about my first crush, a guy in high school who never knew I existed. He told me about the years he'd spent pushing down his feelings, convincing himself they didn't matter. It wasn't perfect, but it was honest, and that was enough. At work, we were careful. No one needed to know, not yet. Sarah still teased me about our vibe, but she didn't push, and I was grateful. The office felt different now, less like a cage and more like a place where I could be myself, even if it was just in small ways. One evening in April, we were walking along the river, the air warm with the first hints of summer. The city was alive around us, but it felt like it was just us, the rest of the world fading away. We stopped at a bench, the same one I'd sat on months ago, staring at the water, trying to make sense of my life. "James," William said, his voice soft, "I don't know where this is going, but I'm glad I'm here with you." I looked at him, his face lit by the setting sun, and felt something settle in my chest. Not certainty, not yet, but hope. "Me too," I said, reaching for his hand. He didn't pull away. We sat there, hands clasped, watching the river reflect the city lights. It wasn't an ending, not really. It was a beginning, fragile and new, but ours. For the first time in years, I felt like I was exactly where I was supposed to be.